Hello and welcome. It's Chin from TechUcon. In this session, I want to talk a bit about building an IP strategy. So this again is brought to you by the Accelerate IP program in conjunction with New Ventures BC. So let's get right to it. Strategy, especially around IP, is a bit of a complicated topic, and I do find that every time I participate in a workshop and whatnot, that the perspective that often comes either from a legal provider or an IP-oriented advisor tends to have a certain bias to it. And not to say that any of the advice is wrong, but you just have to be mindful about where the feedback is coming from. Because generally, of course, like if they're in a position to benefit from working with you to protect your assets, to protect your ideas more, they will tend to give you advice that pushes you in that direction. And again, it's not that you shouldn't protect your assets, but at the end of the day, when you build a business, it's all about walking that fine line between what you're comfortable with, what risk you're willing to take, and also what you can afford, because there may be certain times that you're not able to afford to do everything perfectly upfront. And that is a realistic thing as well. So, obviously, I'm not saying that you should cut corners in areas that matter, but there are certain times when there are certain situations where you may decide to put off, let's say, patenting strategically because to defer costs, not only to defer costs, but also because maybe you want to keep it as a trade secret, because when you patent, you have to disclose, right? So we'll go into some of the nuances around that. But I want to mostly talk a bit about how to build a good strategy. First off, to understand strategy, strategy is about the choices that help you define where you are going to play and how you will win, right? IP strategy isn't a plan. It is not a checklist. It's not, I'm going to do a patent. I'm going to patent in the US market. I'm going to then register a trademark. Those are action items. Same with a business strategy. It's not just a simple business plan where you say, I'm going to launch, I'm going to sell in this market, this and that. The goal with a comprehensive and a good strategy is that you need to account for competitors. You need to account for what markets you intend to go into eventually, even though you're not already in there. Maybe even let's say if you're planning on raising capital, if that is your goal with your business, you need to understand, what is your exit plan and how are you going to manage investor expectations? When will you start to put certain things in place, right? At the end of the day, and as I've mentioned before in the previous session, an IP strategy is not just about patenting, right? Don't patent just for the sake of patenting. A good IP strategy should improve the value of your company. We talked about justifying the value of your organization. Not only that, good IP strategy will help you better position yourself to increase revenue for your business through your intangible assets. So be it through licensing or maybe merchandising some of your assets. So let's look at strategy in more detail. IP strategy is not a plan, it's not a policy, it's not just having non-disclosure agreements, non-compete clauses, it's not just filing a patent, having things like training or education or protocols in place. All of those are policy, right? Having IP strategy is basically on a higher level, is having clarity on how you are leveraging your assets, your intangible assets in your business. What do you own? What is valuable? How is it captured and defined? How is it being used in the business? And how do you justify value? How do you tie some form of revenue or maybe value back to that asset? At the end of the day, it is primarily about driving value in alignment with business objectives. Minimizing risk and protection is secondary. So, what does an IP strategy look like? An IP strategy, if you have built one out, it should allow you to understand what you care about patenting, or even keeping a trade secret. If you don't know what you want to patent, or if you don't know what is a trade secret, or if you don't know what data is valuable to your organization, you do not have a strategy, right? Having a strategy allows you to understand what is valuable, where you will focus your attention on, and what emphasis to put on X, Y, and Z. So, for example, it should allow you to answer questions like, let's say, if you find out that a competitor has a patent that prevents you from going after a certain target customer. So, for example, if let's say one case study I recently did in one of the workshops by Houston from In-House IP was talking about uh, a theoretical company that is using this technology to capture carbon from the environment and turn it into nanomaterials that can be resold into the construction industry to strengthen their concrete. And let's say if you find out that, oh, someone else has patented that technology to produce those nanomaterials and use it in concrete, then you might be, oh no, you might be in a situation where now you can't access that target customer, i.e., those concrete production companies, because that was what you intended to do, and you found out that someone else has already patented that, right? So what do you do then? Having a strategy allows you to understand, will you pivot to serve another customer? Or no, you want to focus on the target customer? If so, what might you do then? Maybe you're going to try to find ways to invalidate the patent. Maybe you will design around your patent, try to come up with ways to do it. So instead of producing that type of nanomaterial, maybe you're producing a different kind of compound. I don't know, right? Or maybe you're going to attempt to partner up with them or acquire that company that has that patent. So there are many different ways to approach the problem, and that strategy is the piece that will allow you to understand how you will go about doing that. So your IP strategy should sound like and should be able to answer questions like, we plan to be in these markets. This is how we plan on monetizing, right? Here are our competitors. Here's how we will respond if this happens, right? Here's how we will navigate litigation if someone is trying to sue us, if someone is infringing on our IP. And here's how IP will contribute to things like, licensing, justifying value, blah, 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 blah. It's not just a simple to-do list. So how do we begin building it out? I think it's very, very similar to building business strategy. And if you already have some form of a business strategy in place, maybe you've built out using a tool like a business model canvas or lean canvas, that's actually a very good starting point. IP strategy does not start with looking at your IP assets. That is one of the problems that I often see a lot of consultants do. They say, okay, let's look at this company. Let's look at what they currently have. Don't start there, because if you start there, if you start by looking at what IP assets you have, you will build a strategy around the IP and it will not necessarily align with the business objectives. So start with your business. What is your why, your mission? What are you trying to accomplish, right? Related to the why and the mission is, who are you going to be serving? Who are your target customers? What do you care about? So very simply put, are there certain markets that you plan on being in, especially in relation to IP, because IP is jurisdictional? That means you need to seek out protection in each country that you plan on having operations in. So if you plan on going down to the US market, then you need to have a US patent if patenting is the thing that you're looking for, right? Or same with trademarks as well. You need to make sure that you have rights to the trademarks in the regions that you plan on operating as well. What might you consider pivoting towards? Equally important, what might you not be interested in serving or going towards, right? And then from there, also identifying and understanding, okay, what assets do we have now? So you notice that doesn't come first. That now comes down third place in line. What are our assets and what do we want to prioritize? Are we focused on building a brand? Is that our long-term play? Do we want to become a consumer-facing product or service? Or are we planning on being kind of the underlying technology that powers something else, right? Maybe you're trying to become an OEM solution, or maybe you are trying to sell your software as a white label solution that other people can use. What is meaningful for you? Because that will inform how much emphasis you put on maybe things like trademarks versus whether or not you want to do things like patents or use a trade secret. What other things do you have out there? Is it you need unique expert knowledge? Do you have very specialized processes? Are you leveraging certain technologies that only you know how to operate? And yeah, from there we can start to think about, okay, now we know what our business is trying to do, who we are serving, and what assets we have. We can start to shape things up a bit. And obviously important is, how will you monetize, right? What is your goal? Are you planning on just selling the product or service upfront? Are you actually offering maybe to give it as a black box that people can use, but they won't know how to use it? So maybe you're licensing something out, white labeling something. understanding as well what has gone into the development of some of those assets, what value is attached to it, like what products or service leverage those kind of knowledge or intangible assets that you have put into it. How is it actually driving revenue for your business? And lastly, what do you plan in terms of growth and what's your exit plan? Are you planning on getting acquired, selling your business? Because if you're planning on getting acquired, who are the potential buyers? What's your timeline? Might you need to raise capital? If you do need to raise capital, do you need to speed certain things up or slow certain things down in order to make it happen? So for example, if you have patents granted, it helps justify the value of your business when you're raising capital, and it makes it a lot easier for you to get investors on board versus if you don't have a patent granted, right? So you may deliberately align certain IP milestones to align with your business growth and capital raise growth as well. What markets are you planning on going into? How soon do you want to be in those markets? That might also inform your decision to pursue certain protection in different markets. So beyond our own business, the next thing that we need to start to consider is understanding the landscape. So who else is out there, both direct and indirect competitors? So, for example, if you are a restaurant, a direct competitor could be another restaurant trying to sell similar food in your region, right? An indirect competitor could be not even a restaurant. Maybe it's a meal prep or a delivery company. So who are those players? What might they care about? And you need to be mindful and aware of that because that will inform certain decisions around things like trademarks, maybe how you might safeguard your recipes, maybe it will inform things like even patenting unique processes if you have them. And yeah, beyond those direct competitors or indirect competitors, like we mentioned before when we talked a bit about exit plan, what's happening in the market in terms of who's acquiring who's buying the technology. Is growth slowing or accelerating in your market? Not only understanding who has rights to certain things, not only patents here, although I use the word patents a lot, but also trademark searching as well. But understanding who has protection for certain assets, who else beyond just the protection piece is actually actively pursuing litigation in the space, because you need to know maybe there are patent trolls in your space. Maybe there are people who will deliberately try to steal your technology by threatening you with legal action, right? Who knows? And we talked a bit about the patent trolls piece, but the goal here is it's not possible to plan for unidentified risk. So you need to start to identify them early so you can start to know and think about who might go after you and how might you respond to them. When it comes to litigation, when it comes to dealing with threats of cease and desist, people sending you lawyer letters saying that you're stolen the IP or you're using something that they patented, you need to think about how you will both avoid but also respond to it as well. How might you avoid drawing attention to yourself? How will you justify freedom to operate if someone comes after you? Do you know what your rights are? If someone from China is saying, hey, you're using my company name, does that matter to you, or is that just a baseless threat? So you need to understand whether or not there's legitimacy to what they're claiming. What will you do if they do threaten you, right? Usually going to court is the last resort, even for them as well. Will you try to settle out of court? Will you build around it? Will you change your technology? Will you decide that you want to go to court and defend it? Or maybe you're going to avoid that market. Are you going to sell off that IP? Maybe you could sell your patents to them, or maybe you could buy the patents, right? Or maybe you can even buy the company, acquire them if you're in that kind of position. Maybe it's a way to explore partnership. Maybe you might say with them, hey, we want to leverage your technology, but you can also leverage ours and we can serve different segments of the market. Who knows? Maybe you're going to do some form of licensing. Beyond that, so I'm going to take a pause to recap. So the first thing we've talked about is understanding your business objectives and goals. From there, we've evaluated the landscape. The third piece then is to understand what IP assets and tools are available to you, and how they will kind of play in that strategy piece. So what IP do you have and how will you leverage them? What forms of protection will you seek out, right? Not everything is appropriate for being patented. Maybe some things you can't patent because it's not novel, right? Or maybe you have already disclosed certain information, and in the patenting world, we'll go into patents in more detail, but in the patenting world, if you disclose something that counts as prior art, and basically it prevents you from patenting that technology because it's already out there as public knowledge. Um, is it better to go after something as a trade secret, or maybe you want to pursue what we call a industrial design, or in the US that's called a design patent, right? So what is of priority, what is less so, what is worth pursuing depending on your business objectives and the value add. At the end of the day, do remember that patents are not required by an investor or even by a company that's looking to buy you. You can also definitely have trade secrets and leverage that very well. But the key is to be able to articulate what is your IP strategy and why you're deciding to make the choices that you're making in your business. Not just saying, we haven't patented because we don't have the capital to, right? So let's look at some of those different protection kind of mediums and rights. The first one is the most common one that we will be talking in a lot more detail, which is basically the patent itself, going after patents, utility patents. These are more for inventions that are functional. That's the keyword there. Then we have what we call a design patent in the States, or industrial design in Canada. These are more aesthetically oriented. So if you have a unique bottle or packaging design, or maybe you have a unique chair, and then we have trade secrets, which give you indefinite protection as long as you are able to effectively prove that you have maintained that secrecy and you're taking the right measures to safeguard it. And do know that with trade secrets, you can also pursue legal action if someone has unlawfully obtained your trade secrets because maybe they've hacked your system. You can sue someone, or if let's say an employee that used to work for you has taken your recipe, gone and worked for a competitor and used and taught them that recipe, you can sue them as well. So understanding the trade secret piece. Copyright is more for the creators. So these are for like artists, musicians, photographers. How will you leverage that to prove that these are your assets, and using them is without your permission is unlawful? And lastly, trademarks. So these are kind of identifiers, not only visual, not only your logo, but also like your slogans, your jingles, your taglines, those kind of things, color schemes, those can also be considered under trademarks as well. So how will you leverage the different things to protect your business and kind of carve out a niche in your market? So quick comparison, I won't go into too much detail because we will dive more into them in a future session. But like I mentioned, patents are functional. Key thing to know about patents is the protection you get does differ by what they call jurisdiction, or by per country. That means if you want to be able to sue a company in China for making knockoffs, you need to make sure that you patent in China as well, right? So it is country based. Because of that, obviously you want to prioritize patenting in the countries that you care about. So those might be either countries that you want to sell into, or countries that you will be manufacturing or based out of, right? Because obviously the more patents you file for, the more expensive it's going to get. There are certain requirements around patenting. So, for example, it has to be something that's novel, something that's new, right? Something that's useful. You can't just patent an interesting chemical that you think might be useful in the future, but you don't know what you're going to be using it for right now. It has to be non-obvious. So not just new. You can't just say, I'm going to put a eraser on the other end of a pencil and that's going to be my new invention. It has to be something that not the average person can kind of come up with. So you need to have unique insider knowledge, or you're piecing together two pieces of information that are, even if they're non-novel, you're piecing together two different things in a new way, and that's giving unexpected new results. So that's non-obvious as well. When you patent, one thing, if you don't already know, is that you are required to disclose your invention in full detail. Yes, full detail. That means anyone can copy you. So, do you want to do that? Maybe you may not want to disclose certain things if it makes sense and if you're able to keep it as a trade secret. You may also, even within a single invention, patent certain components of it while keeping other components a trade secret. That's also possible. Patents are only valid for a 20-year term, so it does give you that head start and it prevents people from coming into your space. But after 20 years, it's fair game, right? So you can obviously, with certain methods and tools, kind of drag out that 20 years. So how you drag that out is typically by strategically laying out your filing process so that you don't have to actually try to accelerate yourself from filing the patent to actually getting the patent granted. So you can drag that timeline out for, I think it's almost up to 30 months on a maximum. And that gives you a bit more time around the 20 years. And then on the other side, trade secrets. Trade secrets are kind of like the opposite to patents. Usually, a trade secret is most beneficial when a patent is not. So, for example, if something can be easily reverse engineered, you will want to, or you should be more inclined towards leaning towards a patent. On the other hand, if it's difficult for someone to reverse engineer something, then you may intentionally opt to keep it as a trade secret because it's hard for them to figure out how you have done it in the first place, right? So keeping it as a secret will help you gain that advantage. The great thing about trade secret as well is it's relatively low cost, i.e., you don't have to pay any filing fees, you don't have to engage with any lawyers, and it's indefinite as long as you're able to keep it a secret. But obviously, the problem with quote unquote trade secret is that if it's out there, it's out there. Then you can't patent it anymore, right? Um, Trade secrets apply to everything, not only your functional inventions, but also like let's say your unique industrial know-how or your um, network to your customer database, your vendor database, kind of licenses that you have would be all of those things. And obviously it's worldwide. The third one is the design patent. We've mentioned is more visual oriented. It like a regular patent, it's also jurisdictional, so per country. The key thing that they look for is it distinctive? Is it visually different enough? Same, you need to have detailed disclosure. You need to have the drawings and the diagrams of your design. It's only valid for 15 years. And I think it's not renewable. And then beyond design, you have trademarks. So those are the words, logos, sounds, slogans that I mentioned. Also jurisdictional per country. The key things that they look for is number one, distinctive. Is it unique? Is it recognizable? And does it not cause confusion? Because if it's going to cause confusion, then it's going to be harder to be granted that trademark. One nice thing to know about trademarks, if you're not already aware, is you can enforce trademark without formal registration as well. Although obviously there are some benefits to registering a trademark, which we can discuss in more detail in a future session. Do you have to disclose? Yes, you have to disclose a trademark because you're actively proving people that you're using it, right? And it's renewable indefinitely on a 10-year term. Copyright. If you're not already aware, code programming that you write into software, that is copyright. So by default, all code that a developer writes belongs to the developer. That's why if you're working for a company, you need to have IP assignments in place so that your developer's code belongs now to your organization. Art, writing, music, photography. Copywriting is worldwide and it's usually based on the creator and it's based on the lifetime of the creator plus typically in most countries about 70 to 75 years after their death. The main proving point is that it's original, that you are the one who came up with it. And obviously you have to disclose as well. So those are just some of the different mediums and some of the different tools, and then we will go more into how you use them when we discuss each of them in detail. But now that you understand kind of the high level in terms of what tools are available to you, you need to start to think based on what you've outlined in your own business strategy in terms of what markets you're going after, what customers, what timeline you're looking at, who are your competitors, what is the growth of the market, are people coming into your space, are people moving into your space, who knows? If you know those answers, then you can start to plan around what you will do on the IP front. So for example, if you know that you want to be in certain markets, you may say, okay, if we plan on being in these markets in the next 5 years, we should file for protection in those markets right out the gate, right? Are there certain markets that you will forfeit because maybe it just doesn't make financial sense to seek protection in those markets? That's why you see a lot of big companies, they don't have protection in, let's say, in Asia or in China. If it's not their primary market, they don't care if someone else goes into those markets and copies them. Beyond jurisdictions as well, what is the timeline? On average, it takes typically about 6.5 to 7 years from filing of a patent to getting granted in the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, so SIPO for short. That can be expedited. You can get it as quick as within a year. Usually, expediting a granted patent is typically desirable if you know that someone is infringing and you want to pursue legal action against them, or maybe because you want to speed it up so that you can hit that milestone and raise around a capital around that milestone. Or you may intentionally slow it down, right? Maybe you slow it down because you want to spread out the cost. Maybe you need to validate the market more, and you can slow that down through things like provisional patents, using the PCT or what they call a Patent Cooperation Treaty. And that gives you a bit more time to go out there, test the market, get more revenue, raise a round of funding, what have you. What will you do in and around patent marketing, not only patent marketing, but also just even trademark marketing as well? Or how do you strengthen your claims? How do you strengthen your justification? This is all important because you need to understand what you care and what you don't care about. So, for example, if you might say, okay, we want to create an invention and it's only for truckers to use, and we don't care if someone else uses it on a boat, right? Do you or do you not care about that? Do you want to include that in your claims when you're filing a patent? Maybe you might be amending some claims. Maybe you might be filing multiple patents because you're making improvements on top of your technology. You just need to make sure that you are strategic on day one because you don't want to paint yourself into a box and be in a situation where you're like, oh no, we found out that this customer doesn't want to use our solution, but this other customer wants to use our solution, but our current patent only protects us in this market and does not protect us in this other market, right? So you need to understand how you are doing that on day one so that out the gate, you can actually set yourself up to be protected in for all the potential possibilities that you do care about. As it goes along, also not only the claims piece, but also the freedom to operate piece. You need to be wary of, and I don't want to scare you into this, but generally it's not that everyone is going to try to sue you all the time or try to come after you and copy you. But you need to know what to do if that happens, right? How do you understand your rights better? Are you actively looking at patterns in the market? Are you looking at your competitors? Are you seeing what they're protecting against? Are you seeing what inventions they're moving towards, right? What technologies are they adopting? What markets are they moving to serve? And do know that just the act of getting a patent doesn't justify freedom to operate. Getting a patent allows you to exclude someone else from using your invention, but it does not give you permission to do something. So if you're still not too clear on that, the easy example is, let's say if you could put that eraser on the back of a pencil and patent that, if that was considered non-obvious, then you could be granted that as a new patent because it's an improvement on an existing technology. But if you don't have the original patent for manufacturing the pencil itself, then you still need to go and get permission from the original pencil manufacturer to make those pencils, or maybe you are buying their devices, right? So you need to have either licenses, permissions, in order to build and practice your own business. Maybe you may be in the service industry, or maybe you're trying to build something that requires some certifications or certain permissions, right? Basically, like having a patent to build a gun doesn't mean that you can build and use a gun. Make sense? You still need to be certified to do certain things. So having a patent is not the perfect solution for everything, but it does prevent other people from coming into your market. You could say like, hey, pencil manufacturer, I don't have your patent, but you cannot put an eraser on your pencil and sell it because I have the patent for that. Make sense? Moving on from there then is understanding things like licensing and maybe even divesting as well. So what patents are no longer valuable for you? Have things changed with your business? Have you pivoted? If so, might you license certain things out? Might you sell off certain patents? If so, who to? What is no longer valuable? How do you transition that? Or how do you even grow your portfolio? Maybe you're going to go after other patents or other companies that you think your technology will evolve or pivot towards. Maybe you might say, oh, look, that company is doing some interesting things. They have the rights to that, but they don't seem to be commercializing it. We want to be able to do that. Therefore, we are going to acquire their patent or buy the company. And not only the patent piece, but also equally important, trade secret, right? What is a trade secret? What isn't a trade secret? You need to make that clear. You can't just expect employees to not share anything, right? There are certain things that are okay for people to share, but if they don't know it's a secret and they don't know that they have to keep it a secret, then it's not being safeguarded, right? Things that you need to put in place, you need to clearly define who has access to those trade secrets, who knows about it, who is the inventor or owner of it, what security measures do you have in place. For example, you have a clean desk policy so that if customers come into your workplace, they can't just see that information on your desk. Do you use passwords, not only basic things, but also cybersecurity as well? Are you encrypting data so that some hacker can just come in and access and take your things. If you're going to trade shows, what can or can't be shared? And beyond not only talking about the safeguarding of the secret, you also need to document and talk about how it's associated to the business, right? What offerings or products or solutions leverage that information that you're trying to protect? How does it influence your revenue or the value of your company? Because if you can talk about that, then you can justify damages. Beyond IP, the IP piece, the IP component, you're also thinking about kind of the culture in your company as well when you consider IP strategy. Um, what happens to IP as it's being created in your company, right? Do you assign that IP to the company? Is it being captured? Do people know that they're creating something new? So, for example, if you have developers in your company or engineers and they are coming up with ways to fix things in a different way, they may not even think they're inventing something. But if you're not capturing that, then you're not able to put a value on that asset. You're not able to leverage that asset, right? How is that creation owned? Is it co-owned with them? Do you own it? Do they own it? At the end of the day, you need to have some form of accountability around who has access to some of these things, and accountability around who in your organization is in charge of deciding what is valuable, what's not valuable, who needs to know what if certain changes are made, who needs to know if certain things have been disclosed. So you need to have a go-to person for that. Beyond that, it is a bigger piece. It's not only just you as the leader, but making sure that your employees and all the people that you bring on board are aware that there are intangible assets that are valuable in your company, that there are certain things you can or can't do, that you shouldn't be sharing your recipes on Instagram, for example, that you should be aware that our slogan should not be used in certain ways, those kind of things. And that goes with disclosure, right? Um, Understanding things like timing, for example, if someone is going to a trade show or if you have a researcher working on one of your inventions, if they need to publish something, how do you put some of those things in place to protect it before it goes out there into the public? Because let's say, for example, you can file for a patent if you have not disclosed it, if you haven't talked about it, and then after filing for the patent, go and disclose it at a conference, that's okay. But if you've already talked about your solution or technology at a conference or in a publication, and then you try to patent, that won't work because that will then count as prior art. So making sure people are aware of these kind of things on both not only what can or can't be shared, but also how to time certain things, because maybe you may want to put certain safeguards in place sooner rather than later. You need to know that. They need to know that as well. So key thing to know is that it's not a one size fits all. That's why I don't generally share a template when it comes to an IP strategy. But if you really need something a bit more tangible to hold on to kind of put all these thoughts onto paper, I encourage you to start with the something like a business model canvas. And then from there, try to map out steps 1 to 4. So I'll repeat them again. Step 1 is looking at what are your business objectives, understanding within that objective landscape, who are the competitors, who are the alternatives, what markets you're going into. So that's number 2, understanding the lay of the land. Number 3 is from there, you then identify the type of assets that are meaningful and valuable for you. So for example, you might say, okay, we are planning on white labeling our solution. We want to produce this unique widget that we will sell to a manufacturer that will create an end product. We don't want to sell the end product. then in that case, you might say, okay, we don't care about trademarks as much, but we do care about the patenting piece because we want to license. We want to be able to sell the license to use our invention. And then if that's the case, then who are you selling to? What regions are they in? And therefore, that will inform where you may decide to patent. How soon may you need that? Because obviously, no one's going to buy a license from you for a patent that's not granted yet. So again, you may decide to accelerate the process, but at the end of the day, you can't make these decisions around what to do and when to do it without first understanding your strategy. Make sense? So, lastly, once you've built that foundation, making sure that everyone in the organization is aware of things and understand how they play a role in certain things. So yeah, that is kind of it in a nutshell. I wish it was simpler and easier to that. But if you are able to answer all of those questions in steps 1 to 4, then I think, and if you put that into a document, that is a really good starting point for quote unquote an IP strategy. It is something that's living and breathing. You may evolve it as times change. You may realize that, oh, you know what, we never thought of going into this market, but by testing, by marketing, we found out that there is appetite for a solution in this market, therefore we're going to pursue it. You may have to adjust your strategy if that's the case, right? So it's not going to be something that's static. You need to work on it and keep revising it. But it really just starts with having those answers and starting to consider those things. It's not a plan A, it's your plan A, B, and C's. So you need to be able to understand where you want to go, how you want to get there, and also where you don't want to go and what you don't want to do as well.